Way back in 2011, when the BMW X1 first hit showrooms in India, it did fairly well as the most affordable BMW SUV. In fact, this was your entry ticket into the world of luxury SUVs back then. But it wasn't until 2016 that the second generation X1 stepped in and really upped the desirability and practicality quotient for this car. 4 years later, well, here we are. This is a mid-cycle update for the X1. This facelift brings with it a new front end in terms of styling. Now, of course, in typical BMW style, you get an even larger kidney grille that's more in your face. But the biggest change here comes in the form of these new headlights. While they retain the same shape as earlier, if you look closer, instead of the xenon projectors, you now get LEDs. Along those lines, the halogen fog lamps have been done away with and you get LED fog lamps now. And with all of this, you of course get a new front bumper. Now when you move on to the side profile of the car, it's the same as earlier, apart from a different set of alloy wheels, which aren't exactly 2020. Now moving on to the back, you get new LED taillights that look very nice. And like at the front, you get a new rear bumper as well, with a body-colored insert in there. And the tailpipes are now larger to give it a more distinctive look. Styling changes aside, let me show you what's new with this 2020 BMW X1. The answer lies in there, because this is a BS6 spec car, so you get your AdBlue solution filler lid in there. Now when it comes to the interiors of the updated X1, well, it's all pretty much the same in here in terms of equipment, cabin layout and switchgear. What has changed though are the addition of some soft touch plastics over the top of the dashboard and around here. Now that comes with stitching as well to make it look like leather. And you know what? Actually it looks fairly nice. And because it's soft touch plastics, it feels a little bit more premium than before. But in terms of features, well, while it's got everything that you need, some simple things that are missing. Well, at certain times from certain playlists from Apple Music, you can't change tracks. So then I have to put my hands on the center console and change tracks from here. There is also no mute button on the steering wheel. These minor flaws aside, I think the cabin is great. Both front seats are electronically adjustable. There's no bolster adjust, which is a disappointment. And you know, these seats definitely could have had better lower back support. Speaking of seats, let's hop into the back and see what that feels like. Now coming into the rear seat, well, I have to say that there's a lot of space here. I'm fairly comfortable. I have just about adequate under thigh support, and this is probably one of those rare cars where seat comfort is better for the rear seat than the front seats. Yeah, because I really like the lower back support offered by the backrest. It's fairly stiff, but you know what, it's got a decent amount of cushioning, the angle is right, so I'm fairly comfortable seated back here. I have enough leg room, I have enough knee room, and because of the huge dual panel sunroof, you don't feel claustrophobic here at all. So on the whole, I have to say that the rear seat of the X1 is just about perfect. The transmission tunnel at the center now does not have any running gear through it, because this is a front-wheel drive car, but remember, internationally there are all-wheel drive versions of the X1 available. But still, because this is not a rear-wheel drive car, it's much lower than it would have been otherwise. So the transmission tunnel, while it's not too high, it isn't too low either. So this is not going to be a comfortable place for a third occupant. This car continues to be powered by BMW's 2-liter turbocharged diesel engine, and despite the changeover from BS4 to BS6 and the addition of its AdBlue system, well, the engine continues to develop 187 bhp at 4000 rpm, and 400 Newton meters of peak torque is spread between 1750 rpm and 2500 rpm. And like earlier, the engine continues to be mated to an 8-speed automatic gearbox. What does it feel like on the road? Well, BMWs inherently tend to drive very well, and this 2-liter turbocharged diesel engine with this 8-speed automatic gearbox has always offered very good drivability. So from the get-go, throttle inputs result in very linear motion. Now the X1 has 3 driving modes: Eco Pro, Comfort and Sport mode. Now when you initially set off and if you're driving under usual circumstances in the city, driving this car in Eco mode doesn't really have any side effects as such, because the power delivery is still very good and the car drives very well and in a very smooth manner. Aside from lighter throttle inputs to the engine, this Eco Pro mode also offers a coasting mode, in which case when you lift off the throttle, the transmission is disengaged and you save energy doing that. Moving on to comfort mode, well, throttle responses are better and you can drive this car effortlessly in comfort mode all day long in the city, no problem at all. Even if you need to pull off a quick overtaking maneuver, it's not a problem. But if you're seeking a slightly more spirited driving experience, you can always engage sport mode, in which case the gearbox holds gears longer. This helps keep the engine in the meat of the power band so that whenever you depress the throttle, it always enough power. So driving in sport mode is definitely going to be faster. If you're wondering how fast will this car will do 0 to 100 kilometers an hour in under 8 seconds. So when you accelerate hard, the engine just fairly quickly moves on to the 2000 RPM mark. That's when you start getting power from, and performance in the real world feels fairly brisk. The engine feels at its best in the mid-range, typical of a diesel engine, but this is a BMW diesel engine after all, so it does like to rev higher. You can easily move past 4000 RPM, and it's at 4500 RPM that the gearbox gives you optimal shifts. But if you seek a more engaging driving experience, well, you get paddle shifters behind the steering wheel as well, and they do a good job at shifting gears. It's fairly quick. It feels more responsive than the automatic setup. Mind you, there's no problem with that. And when you go for manual shifts, this engine will rev all the way past 5000 to 5500 RPM. Granted that the optimal shift point might be before that, but hey, if you enjoy pushing a car, well, you can do that too. So this powertrain setup is very good. And like I mentioned, BMW knows what they're doing. My only problem here is in regards to the torque steer associated with this car. When you accelerate hard, the traction control light will come on and you will feel the front two wheels fighting for grip. To demonstrate what I'm talking about, let me pull over to a closed section of road and show you exactly what I'm talking about. So we're going to do this in sport mode. And we're going to turn the traction control off. Yeah, entirely. That's off. Let's hope we don't go into that bush over there. And here goes. See me fighting with the wheel? That is torque steer for you. Okay, so that was with the traction control off. Let me try it with the traction control on. Yeah. Alright, sport mode. Right, sport mode, traction control on. That is much better. While this is happening, I can feel the front wheels fighting for grip as they pull at each other, and you've got to really make your steering corrections to keep the car in a straight line. So it's not so bad. We didn't go into that hedge back there, but it's something that's fairly present. And this twitchy nature of the steering wheel when you tend to push this car is something that is a little bit annoying and is something that you should be aware of. Because this is a crossover SUV, you don't sit very high up. In fact, for an SUV, you're sitting quite low down, which is nice because the ride height isn't that high and body roll isn't there as such, which is why around faster beds, there's none of that lean that is typically associated with SUVs. So while that's all well and good, and this 2-liter powertrain is adequate for the X1's performance, let's move on to things that I do not like about this car. Well, the ride is just bumpy. This feels like an old school BMW. The suspension setup feels fairly stiff. So the moment you hit a bump, there's going to be a loud crashing noise. You will feel the bump. And if you feel that here at the front, I'm sure you're going to feel the bumps a little bit more at the back. So that is not a nice experience. And then there's the matter of road noise and tire noise. This car is running Bridgestone Turanza tires. They're nice tires, but there's so much tire noise inside this cabin. It's fairly loud at all times, and more so over abrasive tarmac and broken roads. In this day and age, you don't associate that with a car like this. The 2020 BMW X1 then. Well, it's much the same as earlier, except that it feels a little more plush on the inside now. It's cleaner too in terms of its emissions. And by the time you watch this video, this car would have hit showrooms on the 5th of March. Expect prices to start at around rupees 40 lakh. And that marks your entry into the world of BMW. As for me personally, well, I think that 3 Series is going to be just a few lakh more than the X1. So that's something for you to think about. But if it's an SUV that you're looking for, well, the X1 offers you good road presence, especially its front-end design, which is quite in your face.